are here on the second day of m.i.l.a.p, and I hope you're as excited as I am for what's in store. We've got an incredible lineup of panel discussions, activities, and performances. So get ready for an unforgettable experience. As we all know, the world is constantly changing, and nowhere is that more evident than in our cities. Rapid urbanization and technological advancements have brought about many changes in our urban areas, and with those changes come new challenges and opportunities. Today, we've brought together a panel of experts who will share their insights and experiences on this topic. I request Dr. Swathi Shivanand to escort the panelists, Meera K. and Rasheed Kappan, onto the dais. Ooru Suddi, journalism of, for, by the city. The topic of this panel discussion is of great relevance in today's world, where cities are rapidly evolving and journalism has a crucial role to play in highlighting the issues that impact the lives of citizens. The conversation will revolve around the questions of how and when the city became an object of legitimate inquiry for journalism. If journalism engaged with thematic inquiries such as health, education, crime, politics, sports, it is pertinent to ask that what are these transformations outside and inside the newsroom that have allowed to bring different facets of city into the newspaper? How did the city beats evolve, and how have they transformed over time? How city-centric newspapers or online publications, both in English and Indian languages, have changed the notions of what is news. Let's delve into this discussion and explore more with the help of our panelists. With that being said, allow me to introduce today's panelists. Meera K., the co-founder of Citizen Matters, an award-winning civic media platform focusing on critical urban issues, ideas, and solutions for the cities. Citizen Matters empowers citizens with the knowledge, understanding, and tools to make cities sustainable, equitable, and livable. Meera also helped initiate Open City, an urban data platform. She is a founder trustee at the Urvani Foundation, a non-profit working on civic media, open data, and citizen engagement. Meera is also an Ashoka Fellow, recognized for her work in building open knowledge platforms that allow citizens to collaborate and improve their cities. Welcome, ma'am. Rasheed Kappan, an independent multimedia journalist who has over 28 years of journalistic experience in The Times of India, The Hindu, Deccan Herald, The News Laundry, The Federal, and The Pro. Kappan has authored hundreds of articles on urban mobility, environment, sustainability, education, crime, civil aviation, defense, aerospace, art, culture, entertainment, and the interface between policy, planning, and activation on the ground. He is one of the most followed journalists on Twitter from Bengaluru. In 2018, Kappan was adjudged the Media Person of the Year by the Namma Bengaluru Foundation for his articles on urban mobility and media campaigns for environmental sustainability. He is the founder of Kappansky and co-founder of Art Bengaluru Collective. He currently anchors the DH Radio podcast for Deccan Herald and media consultancy for The News Trail. Venturing into teach mode, Kappan has delivered over the years multiple lectures and creative hands-on media workshops in various reputed colleges. Welcome, sir. The moderator for this session is Dr. Swathi Shivanand, Assistant Professor at Department of Liberal Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences in m.i.l.a.p, Bengaluru. Dr. Swathi has received a PhD from the Center of Historical Studies at JNU, New Delhi. She was a postdoctoral researcher in a project on Bengaluru City with the University of Minnesota. Dr. Swathi has several years of experience in research and previously worked with the Alternative Law Forum, Indian Institute of Human Settlements, Center for Policy Research, and The Hindu in Bengaluru. Her areas of research include urban and regional histories, particularly through the prisms of development, labor, and gender. She's also interested in political economy of news media, particularly regional language media. Her Her publications have appeared in journals such as Urbanization and Economic and Political Weekly, and in popular publications such as The Wire, Scroll, and The News Minute. A hearty welcome to each of you. So without further ado, let's begin this exciting and insightful discussion. Over to the panel.
Thank you, Veda. That was a great introduction to all of us. I'll just begin with a few remarks before I engage with the panel. The reason behind putting this panel together was to think about the relationship between city, journalism, and democracy. When we think of journalism as the fourth estate, and the imagination is that journalism speaks truth to power. But in this imagination, the speaking truth to power is often imagined as, as journalists or journalism organizations speaking to something at the global level, perhaps Al Jazeera speaking to US imperial media, or perhaps at the national level. So we think of the we think of newspapers and journalists standing to, say, the national government, just the way the Indian Express stood up to the government of the day during emergency. So that's the imagination that we have of journalism, democracy, and speaking truth to power. But in this imagination, the city doesn't really figure so much. City and democracy, the relationship between city, journalism, and democracy doesn't really figure too much. And we see this hierarchy even in newsrooms where reporting on cities is just a stepping stone to moving from state to national to perhaps even international levels of journalism. So there's a hierarchy even within newsrooms, and that replicates in the way in which we think of journalism's relationship to democracy. And city's relationship with democracy and journalism's relationship with democracy is hardly ever thought about or engaged with. When we think of the city, on the other hand, we think of city as the site of where global capital intervenes, and we have these large mega city projects, etc. And a lot of journalistic writing communicates that kind of aspirations of cities to be global. And within this, and so we have all these images of skylines, of metros, and some of the stuff that we have done as decoration also shows skylines and metro as the imagination of a global city. But journalistic writing also does something else. It communicates the contradictions of these aspirations to be global. And when it talks about dispossession of human and of marginalized human and more than human lives, it's actually talking about about democracy and how cities are not just spaces, not just aspirations towards something global, but also a site where democratic struggles take place. So this is the context in which I wanted to engage the panel with about broadly about city journalism and democracy. And I wanted to start with Meera, and if you could give us if you could offer a few remarks on what you think could be the possible relationship between city and democracy and journalism. That could be a good start.
Thanks, Swathi. I think there are two aspects to this local space, right? One side, local, your city is really the source of most of your daily pain points, whether it is traffic or garbage or, water issues or power cuts and so on, right? That's one aspect that it affects us so much, and we kind of take it for granted, and we're really not really doing much to kind of fix those problems, right? That's one side. The other side, it's also a vantage point for democracy. This is democracy in practice, in action, compared to, okay, every 5 years you may have the parliamentary election, you vote for MPs and then next level assembly, but you don't deal with them on a day-to-day basis. Whereas your local councillors or corporators are the people you actually can visit them, engage with them, be part of the ward committees, or there's much more of that interaction. You actually see it playing out, right? That engagement. So from both sides, it's very, very critical. But for some reason we have this thing like, okay, like you mentioned, journalism is all about the big things. But here is where you actually can make a difference. Writing about foreign policy helps, but it's not going to lead to immediate change. Whereas writing about your local issues actually is very tangibly, you can see the change happening. So yeah, and also the fact is that we are, the kind of attention we pay to local is not in proportion to the scale of the problem. Literally, remember, our cities are huge. Bangalore is 12 million, that's equivalent to whatever, Sweden. Chennai is equivalent to, let's say, Belgium. Mumbai is equivalent to even Sri Lanka, perhaps. I don't know. If you really look at the big, the greater city, the sizes, they are equivalent to countries, and they are complex, and they have like as many issues. And there's a range of, stakeholders in the city, right? Whether it is migrant workers or Anganwadi workers or, startup people. So that diversity is also not something that we are kind of very cognizant of when we cover the day-to-day things. So a certain kind of topics get covered, certain kind of people get covered. But I think it's time to kind of take a step back and look at, okay, here is the actual big picture.
Yeah, many questions. Okay, so when you mentioned that, journalism is a progression from being a local reporter, city reporter, to a political reporter, to a national and foreign affairs reporter. So, I personally can speak for myself. I deliberately chose not to get into politics and, national and international. Of course, I have my own interest and I know where I stand. But from a city reporting perspective, I understand that all newspapers, the bulk of the circulation comes from the city. And unless you understand the city from a hyperlocal and a policy level scenario, you are not going to do justice to reporting in a very open and transparent way. So you can talk about one street here, one street there. You have hundreds of readers coming and telling you. So what happens is the cub reporter is sent to that particular street. He writes about that street and then be done with it. Okay? There's no follow-up. There's no looking at a big picture. Why does this, if a street is not well, if the streets, roads are not well, if the drains are not working, the linkages between these to see a bigger picture and connecting it to budgeting, for instance, governance, for instance, administration, and policy level interventions doesn't happen because reporting itself works in silos, So the beat reporter, there are, of course, because I worked in 3 newspapers, I know the internal politics within newspapers, the ego is hassles, the reluctance to share sources and, official resources between reporters. So what happens is a bigger understanding of the city is not coming through in a newspaper. So what we lack is we do have political analytical stories. We talk about NATO, Russia and Ukraine, but we really don't understand why the pipe is so leaking so frequently. Start from there, because this affects you daily. Yeah.
Thank you for those opening remarks, and I think that's a good place to start this discussion from, in terms of why it's important to pay attention to the local, because that's really where we all live, and that's also a possible site of action for us. So I wanted to ask Meera about how you started Citizen Matters, which is primarily focused on Bangalore city, and what were the motivations behind it?
Yeah, so when we co-founded Citizen Matters, my co-founder Subbu, Vincent and me, this was around 2007-8, and we were really looking at what's going on in Bangalore, and Bangalore was growing from about 4.5 million that time. It was at that point I think 6 million, and that's after that they actually expanded the city limits, and then eventually we kind of literally have now doubled in population, right? And it was also a city in progress, right? Everything was a work in progress. flyovers getting built, there were roads, there were all sorts of things happening. I mean, you thought that was bad. Now, of course, it's a different situation. But still, at that point, all of this was happening, and as citizens, we had questions we didn't find answers to, saying why was the Siliport flyover taking like 4 years to complete? Whatever happened to the Domlu flyover, I think took even longer. So what is happening? Who's a contractor? Is it an issue of budget? Is it an issue of design? Who took these decisions? How do you hold the government accountable? So all of these questions were there, and we didn't find answers. And one of the reasons was, like Rasheed pointed out, these are complex issues, and the limited, the coverage that you see in a daily with whatever 500 words cannot do justice. It actually, each of these needs like a full page to really understand what's going on. So that's how we started and said, okay, this is something we want to understand, because unless you know why things are broken, we will never be able to figure out how they can be fixed. And that's sort of the starting point. So we started Citizen Matters as a local news magazine. It was always like sort of long form. We didn't do the daily breaking news, the short reports, but we took a step back and tried to go deeper into, and as since we didn't have the pressures of daily, and I understand that also, because that is a completely different model, and it's very hard to kind of keep following up and going back to, what happened to, there'll be a new announcement and we have a story about it, but there is no time to ask like what happened to the similar announcement you made last year, you had whatever allocated like a few lakhs or a few crores for that, right? So those kind of questions and like connecting the dots, following up, adding that perspective was something we wanted to do. So, and we looked at it as complementing the kind of daily coverage the newspapers that time were doing. So we started with a local news magazine, and we found like initially people were very surprised that there's actually so much to write about local, and so we went through the journey and kind of evolved into a larger urban focus issue, because we found many of these were systemic. It was not just about that one flyover, it is about the whole process of how contracts are given out. It is how the master plan was devised and how that is translated into specific projects. So the entire thing was all connected, and it takes time to sort of understand and expand on those aspects, right? Bringing different aspects in as well. So that was our starting point. We tried to look at it from like a systems side. So now we do that, which is sort of the macro level, but we also do the micro, what we call the micro aspect is basically what is actionable, what is that you as a citizen can go out of it. So those are the two aspects that we see, we cover the stories, and we look at it as the lens of, and every issue is basically an intersection of, there is environment, there's local economy, there is governance, all of these are sort of the different lenses through which each issue we address.
So Meera just spoke to us about the difficulties of covering the city on a daily basis, and hence the model to kind of move towards a sort of like a long form journalism model. But Rasheed, you've been a journalist with 3 newspapers, and you were also there in the thick of things when Bangalore was exploding in the 90s and the early 2000s, and we were just like the flyovers everywhere, and and corruption and all of that was happening. But can you give us a sense of what it was like in the 90s and 2000s to be a city reporter, and what kind of new things were you grappling with in a newsroom when you were covering the city, and what the city really meant at that time?
Okay, this is a long time back. It was 1994.
Okay.
When internet was still in its taking baby steps, and Google was still not in the horizon. So I was thrust into, I remember the first day on May 11th, I think. I joined the Times of India, May 11th, 1994. So a crime reporter was desperately wanting to shed the load of crime on somebody new. Okay, so the day I landed up, the chief reporter said, "What do you want to do?" I mean, of course, the trial by fire is to go through the crime reporting thing. You learn a lot when you're on crime reporting. So this crime reporter, I don't want to take her name, but she told the crime reporter, now that Rasheed is there, let him start doing crime, right? So, of course, some of them call me a criminal reporter. I mean, that's different. Now, it was a totally alien thing. But the thing is, what happened was, within 3 months of me joining, the Urdu riots broke out. You know, Urdu riots, for the people who are just who may not have been born in 1991. I'm sure many of those students here would not be born. So it was about we had this the diversity in the news channel was like DD1 and DD2. You know, he had such great diversity, DD1, DD2.
Okay.
Now switching channels was so easy. So we had a Kannada Doordarshan. So in that Kannada Doordarshan, they had a 20 minutes of Kannada news at 7:30. So a new director came to DD Kendra and he wanted to put a Urdu news. You know, Urdu news was like 5 minutes of Urdu news and then 15 minutes of Kannada news. But then protests started in a small way with Kannada organizations. Within 2-3 days, it took a totally communal turn. You know, the entire city started burning. And then I was asked to cover it. So I was a cub reporter, barely months old in the profession. And then I used to go in the morning and go around the city, burning places. I remember sitting inside Sangliana's car, and then going into Chamarajpet when there were rumors that there's a huge building and somebody had gone up and is about to throw a bomb from top, you know, and the police, Sangliana very dramatically saying charge and all that, and then the police jeeps were flying in. So that was kind of a very exciting time for me. So I remember for 10 days in a row, my story was the lead in Times of India. You know, 17 to 20 people died in Bangalore, in firing, in riots and all that. So those were the days, and we had no Google. We had no perspective to give. Every word was a fresh, original story. You know, it had to be, and of course we had to rely on senior reporters to give some kind of perspective to that. And then, of course, we want to, they used to still have those newspaper files, you know, you had to go through those archives and all that. It was a laborious process. Today's journalists, you know, they repeat last year's story because a lot of stories keep repeating in a cyclical thing. That's why we say many journalists are very eco-friendly because they recycle their own stories, you know. So, a lot of things have become very easy these days.
Yeah.
And of course, then the online media came and it diversified from pure print to, you know, skeletal online to full online. And where I've seen the progression, you know, and I've also seen the luxury of time disappear, you know. So a reporter, I remember my first story, the chief reporter told me, okay, take a break from your crime reporting, do this education story. So I got a story about, I think it was Center for Learning. It was about a school which didn't have exams till 10th standard, you know. So I wrote the story, they gave a good display, and the next day, the editor told me the phone is not, the landline, no smartphones there. The landline has not stopped ringing. They're getting calls from Lucknow, Nagpur, all over India. That was my first story. And it was like, you know, if you look back, it is a completely different world today, right? You get immediate reaction. And then we started getting letters, you know, so many letters. And letters to the editor was a very prime interactive column. That was the only space. Today, of course, you have so much comments that many people have blocked those comments. You know, it has become so toxic. So by the time I spent 11 years in Hindu, I've seen the entire progression. Then by the time I came to Deccan Herald, it had evolved, you know. So journalism, it was a fast-paced journalism, and of course we have seen the electronic media where mic is thrust into a politician's mouth and whatever he blurts out is the news for the day. it stalls the parliament for days together, that becomes, So I've seen the transformation of news itself change dramatically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that reporter who handed off crime to you was kicking themselves that they lost out on such a big story with the Urdu riots. So, but thank you for sharing that that transition in the idea of what is news itself. Since both of you have been, engaged with Bangalore at for such a long time, I wanted to ask you about how Bangalore has featured in journalistic coverage, and has this changed over time? Is there a difference in the kinds of things that we're focusing on from when you started Citizen Matters, perhaps, to what we do now? Is there some transitions? Are there some changes that you see in how Bangalore is portrayed? Meera.
I think from a local coverage perspective, Bangalore's pretty good now compared to most cities.
When you started,
also.
okay.
Yeah, we have a lot more, and it's not just the daily papers do get into. They devote a lot more column centimeters to local news. There are other platforms, online digital media, including ours. And there is also a very, very active citizenry.
Okay.
Right? And this is a combination of, from a media perspective also, there's been like a push and more attention paid. And also I think we should credit social media because people have started talking about these issues much more. And there is a small but significant number getting involved in these issues. So all of this in a way is kind of getting catalyzed, this whole interaction, right? So from that perspective, we have a lot more coverage.
Okay.
So you have, for example, obviously something like the steel flyover became national news.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have realized, expect it to happen like maybe 20 years earlier.
Right.
Because even then there were protests when Kappan Park was, getting affected. There were other kind of issues as well. But getting into, thanks to this kind of digital and social media, it became like it literally blew up. And this is also, it was also why they could also organize better the communities, right? The people protesting, they could get 8,000 people into a human chain or whatever, because there was a way to kind of connect and network and reach people through WhatsApp and so on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more getting told, and yet the question is this in proportion, right?
Yeah.
It is still a certain kind of stories. Yes, infrastructure gets a lot more attention.
Yeah.
Somewhat environment, yes, lakes and all are getting covered well. But like we mentioned earlier, right? Every few months you will find literally tens of thousands of Anganwadi workers coming from all over Karnataka and protesting. You will have other kind of like workers protest, labor, trade unions, garment factory workers. How often do you find their stories?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe my comment is sort of a generalization from an English language perspective, but even in Kannada media, and Rasheed can add to that as well, is there like this balance?
Yeah.
In all the city's stakeholders, in all the issues that affect them, which are the stories we are really covering? So from that perspective, yes, civic sort of gets covered. Startup news has its own space.
Yeah.
But the larger issues of labor, of health, of education, what's going on in our government schools, what are the career aspirations, and what are the opportunities for them.
Yeah.
So I think all of these are like the migrant workers, for example. They're not even like, okay, they don't have a vote, fine, but does it mean we don't cover them at all?
Yeah.
So why are they coming, from not just Raichur and Gulbarga, but from, Assam and Odisha and everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And what are the lives they are leading? How is that affecting the city? Is it helping? And how are they being affected?
Yeah.
All of that is something, these are huge stories if you look at it, and how much attention are we really giving?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important point that you brought up, that even though there's been a proliferation of local news coverage, there are still major blind spots in the way in which we look at cities. I'm wondering if Rasheed would like to say something about these blind spots, given that you've been in 3 different newsrooms, and that also your focus is on urban mobility. So how do you look at these blind spots and this excessive focus perhaps on urban mobility as such.
Yeah, this has been always a debate about service industry, for instance.
Yeah.
Domestic maids, they have their own problems, right?
Yeah.
Migrant laborers and all that. So the standard response of your chief reporter or editor is, they are not our readers. Do they buy a Deccan Herald or a Times of India? Even to a lesser extent, they can't even afford a Prajavani, right? Because if their salaries are in their 1,000, 2,000, they don't want to pay 300 rupees a month to get a Prajavani, right? So how do you solve this puzzle?
Yeah.
In the sense, you want the advertisers and you want the office-going crowd to pick up the newspaper and read. The reality is not many are reading newspapers. The teenagers are not even looking at the sports page. They're not even spending 5 minutes on the newspaper, not even on the headlines.
Yeah.
So we asked them why you don't read newspapers. They say, we have in shorts. So I told one of them that in shorts is an insult to seasoned journalists. We spend the entire day to write a 500 word story. In shorts, make it for a quick 50-minute 50-word story.
Yeah.
All that perspectives, your research, everything is reduced to 50 words.
Yeah.
And they spend 5 seconds on it.
Yeah.
Okay? Is it what journalism has come down to?
Yeah.
So when your attention span is so less, how do you make a story about domestic maids interesting to a general reader? When they're not even looking at what in-depth story about Virat Kohli, why will they bother to even look at? These are realistic questions. So how do you solve this puzzle? So one way I had suggested is that, you prick the conscience of people who are going to the office. Okay? You want the maid to come to your house by 8 o'clock so that you can leave at 8:30 to your office. But then if she is living about 10, 20 kilometers away, because affordable housing is that far away,
correct,
how do you ensure that she comes to your house on time?
Yeah.
So create these linkages between your predictable way of looking at things and this connect these dots, So you spoke about mobility.
Yeah.
So we talk about public transport from a very middle class way, newspaper reading, television news reading, public way. You don't look at persons, you talk about the metro, you want metro everywhere, okay? But the cost of a metro, for instance, you have this Whitefield line which is opened up. For a 13 kilometers, he's charging 35 rupees. Now, 35 rupees might be very affordable for the middle class. But for a person who's getting 3,000 rupees a month, 35 rupees every day, one way, it's a big money.
Yeah.
Right? Do you ask such questions? No. So, we need to tackle. So, why can't they look at suburban rail?
Yeah.
Suburban rail can dramatically, automatically decongest our roads. It's proven in our big cities, from Bombay to Hyderabad to Chennai.
Yeah.
Why are they not interested? Because the kind of money to be made from metro per kilometers runs into crores of rupees. Suburban rail, you don't need to even acquire land. Land is there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Prime Minister comes and says within 40 weeks, I think.
Days, I think. No?
No. So it will be ready within 40 months. Yeah, 40 months.
Yeah.
That was done about a year back. Nothing has moved.
Since then, yeah.
People have been fighting for suburban rail for 35 years. The first suggestion came 35 years back.
Yeah.
We are still dependent on BMTC. Affordable BMTC. For a population of 1.3 to 1.4 crore Bangaloreans, we have just 6,300 buses. And they say even if you bring more buses, we don't have the money to pay the conductors or drivers. So how do we bring these things together? These are the challenges. And of course, there are people, I've seen cyclists. We talk about cyclists only from a very elitist point of view. people who are doing weekend cycling. Okay, what about those laborers, migrant laborers who use cycle every day? They're struggling on the roads. They don't even have a, how do you educate them? They don't even, you go in the night, you see them without a headlight or a backlight. Right? You know, how do you create, access controlled cycling paths? You know, because motorists don't care for cyclists. You know, how do you create good walking paths? Forget highways. At least in your own neighborhoods, how do you create walking paths? You know, walking is the most democratic way of mobility, right? From the rich to poor, they can walk on a good footpath. So these issues, how do you tackle these issues on a day-to-day basis and create linkages between policy and practice? That's not happening to the extent we want it to be.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the previous point that Rasheed pointed out, which is very, very important. He said, like, editors will ask you, do the readers care? Right? That is happening in all newsrooms. Now, here's the thing, there are two ways to look at it. One, journalism is a business, media industry, we call it an industry, right? So, which means it has to be viable. Somebody has to pay for all the effort that we are taking. And journalism, I tell you, is very effort intensive. It's a lot of research. If you really do it well, it's not about, taking a tweet and making it a story. That, I'm sorry, I will not call it journalism. But when you actually go do the research, talk to people, understand what's going on, look at data, go dig into literally archives like he's talking about, that is a lot of effort. How do you cover this cost? And I think it's important to understand that, because it's going to affect all of us. It's going to affect the journalism as we know it. It's going to affect our future. It's going to affect democracy. How do we look at this? If we say journalism is a public good, then how do we cover the cost? Can we look at it as a business, right? So I think we need to find answers for this. Nobody's really cracked it yet. The whole media business model is like up in the air. What is really viable, whether it should be for profit, non-profit, who should pay for it, should it be ad-driven, should it be philanthropy money, whatever. There are many options. People are trying various things. There is cross-subsidization, you do events and use the money for journalism. All of that people are trying. We don't know. The answer is not clear yet. But it is something we should all be very aware about. Because unless it's not just about the readers, it's important. There are really critical issues that readers should know about, they may not care about. So it's also good educating the reader. Over the last decades, we've kind of, somewhat managed to, what's called the dumbing down, right? So a lot of media is focused on that from a revenue perspective. But it's also important to educate the public. Right? So how do you show that this may not something that you may initially care about, but this is important in the larger scheme of things, and that's a responsibility that journalists have as well. So we have to, I'm not saying there are answers, but something we have to all consider. And how do you support making of a public good, right? It is like whether it's clean air or good common spaces for us citizens, journalism is as important. So so I think it'd be interesting to see how this plays out over time.
No, I think that's a central issue to address given the state of journalism now. But I think you'll both be pleased to know that some of our students are mandated to read the newspapers, the Hindu and Times of India, on a daily basis. And so there is some hope that not everyone will move into in-shots. But I think what you both brought together was this idea of how we need to have some degree of perspectives as journalists out on the field, and that it's not merely just reporting something that somebody is saying, right? So Meera brought up how projects are announced multiple times. Same project is announced like a few months later, a year later, and the government of the day's thappa is like put on it. So I think even in issues like urban mobility, to talk about the idea of power and who gets left behind and who doesn't, who it's catered to, is something that journalists need to sort of carry along with them. So I wanted to take off from this point and ask ask you, because Citizen Matters also works from this perspective that, from this idea that citizens can also do journalism. So this is idea of citizen journalism, and of course, like, it goes through a process of fact checking and all of those things. What are the advantages and disadvantages of having this kind of citizen reporting as such? And I'm sure you have a lot of experience in that.
Yeah, so right from the early days, pretty much we encourage citizen journalism because we believe that there is the first person experience that people bring in, right?
Yeah.
That narrative is very, very powerful. So having somebody who's gone through the experience of filing an FIR is a lot more insightful than a reporter just doing it.
Yeah.
Right? You need professional reporters, trained journalists to do a lot of things, especially looking at complex issues.
Yeah.
But this is complemented by these first-person stories. So people going through experiences, dealing with issues, and talking about it is very powerful. That's one. The second thing is by the process of them communicating, right? Like everybody has a right to information, they also have a right to communicate.
Yeah.
So that's why this concept of community media, people have a right to, have their voice heard.
Yeah.
And that brings a lot more diversity into public discourse. So this process of them communicating, telling their stories actually empowers people. And they don't just stop at raving and ranting, they typically do in a letters to editor. They actually go, because we tell them like, okay, this is your problem you're facing, what have you done about it? Because otherwise it's not a story.
Yeah.
So then we build, at the process of writing the story, they go back and they figure out what the root causes or the deeper issues. They go ask people, like ask official or whatever. So that going back and forth. So what you see is a story published. It's not like any reporter story. There's a lot of back-end work that actually happens in facilitating that journey of the citizen, right? We call them active citizens, people who are engaged, they participate in their local community issues and so on.
Yeah.
So that is the second part, that is actually leading to people's participation much more.
Correct. Yeah.
And the third aspect is that a lot of people actually are solving local problems, right? Whether they're involved in their rejuvenating their lakes or cleaning up their road, or even getting a good road, or implementing, let's say, rainwater harvesting in their apartment. All of these are stories of change, right? And broadly, one of the reasons a lot of people in our cities don't get into stuff is this belief, right? Oh, nothing can change. Oh, cycle lane, you can have it in Amsterdam, but not in India. Nothing, it will not work here, right? That sort of a cynicism is something like ingrained into a lot of us in India.
Yeah.
So by showing these stories, and literally these are case studies, that this is how things can be done, and this is how it can be done, and people have done it. That inspires a lot more people.
Yeah.
So we have actually seen this, and this is what we consider as our impact, like bringing these stories of change. Literally, you find a playbook of, okay, if you have to, if you see a lake in your neighborhood that seems to be, very dirty, nobody's caring about it, people seem to be encroaching on it or dumping debris, this is how you do, because this is how somebody else has done it. So that process, literally is going through that step-by-step thing, figuring out whose jurisdiction it is, who's responsible for that lake, is there a way to complain to the Pollution Control Board? All of those things it's important to document. And that is again another very impactful and powerful approach.
Yeah. But you spoke about some of these blind spots that exist. So does citizen journalism somewhere in term accentuate it, or perhaps does it address it?
There is a gap for sure, because people who are more articulate, who have access, especially since we are online only, have access to media, get their stories told. So which is why you will find more stories from, let's say, east and southern part of Bangalore, not necessarily from Vijayanagar or Rajajinagar as much. So how do you fix this, find this balance? That is in fact, not just about citizen matters, even in general, media coverage tends to cover issues more from certain areas, because those communities are much more articulate and they have a louder voice, because they are on social media. It's easy to access them. They know how to literally, because they send out press releases when you when they do something, right? So it's easier for media to just take that and publish it. So what happens to the people whose voices are not so loud?
Yeah.
So there is a gap, and we are trying to fix it somewhat by, we have these capacity building sessions. So the idea is to work with communities and help them tell their stories. Again, I mean, there are constraints of budget and all, but to some extent we are working on doing that. But yeah, it's we are aware of it, and I think overall media should also be aware of it, because it's about different communities and whose voice is louder. So we'll have to find a balance.
So, Rasheed, I wanted to ask you, since Meera was talking about how there are these, blind spots that, in terms of which parts of the city get more coverage than others. Is there an awareness of this in mainstream newsrooms? Is there some efforts at sort of at mitigating this divide? How do newsrooms really think and conceptualize the city?
No, if you see she hinted at the financial difficulties.
Yeah.
So if you see certain newspapers, I don't want to name them. When I was the chief reporter, there were 12 reporters under me. They just manage with 5 now. Okay. So reporters are supposed to cover multiple beats across multiple areas, and the BBMP reporters usually is bogged down by what happens in the council, especially during the council.
Yeah.
And also you're supposed to get exclusive stories, breaking stories and all that. So usually the local stories are based on who calls or who sends you a mail, or some contacts from the chief reporter. So, and then depending on the seriousness of this issue, they prioritize, and and also there are a lot of, like she told, that there are a lot of residents, some of them are very active. But essentially there is a difference between, if you look at Bangalore, the older wards, the old 100 wards, which were made bigger, like a Brihat Bengaluru with 198, now it is 243. So the older wards, those issues are generally, many of the issues are relatively much smaller than what's happening on the outskirts.
Right.
And if you look at the eastern part, where you have the flooding happening, last year we had, and not much lessons seems to have been learnt, and we are having the same problem again.
Yeah.
So these are the IT belt, where, obviously they are very well connected, and social media also they are well connected. So those voices are heard much more. And also it's a genuine thing that they have issues, because after 2007 hardly much has changed, in terms of infrastructure, road connectivity, drainage connectivity, in terms of pollution, everything, they are in a much lower, condition compared to the inner city. So these issues come to the fore but also there are areas which are, for instance, I don't know, North Bangalore. Okay, so there is another issue like steel flyover, for instance, the issue of connecting Hebbal to Chalukya Circle coming through North Bangalore. So the entire city there was a campaign built around steel flyover Beda movement. But then there were pockets within North Bangalore who said, we actually need the flyover,
Yeah.
So where do you draw a line? How do you balance this?
Yeah.
These are tricky issues.
Yeah.
We'll have to look at it.
Yeah.
And also, there are also political issues like, some people say, okay, just because Congress was in power, you're very active then, but now BJP is doing the same thing, the government, and you are not very vocal, So these are issues we need to look at, and there's a call taken by different people. Now, you're talking about other...
No, I was asking you in terms of like, are newsrooms aware that there is this divide where only some pockets get more focus and some others are left behind?
So this is one infrastructure-based response to that.
Yeah.
There are also other issues. Also, whatever said and done, objectivity is a myth. So reporters have their own bias.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you are coming from one particular area, you are more aware of it and you respond more quickly to that.
Yeah.
And of course, the chief reporter also might have. So these are all reflections of the society itself. And when your number of reporters is very low, you tend to rationalize, ration which areas to focus based on what.
Based on what? Like, is it based on the fact that they, who
Time,
your readers are?
Time, resources, and all that.
Okay.
Of course, readers also.
Right.
Okay, there are pressures from the advertising, circulation. You know, there are to raise revenue through cross-platform engagements, like citizen engagement is there. For instance, Deccan Herald does this Janaspandana. Okay, so they organize Janaspandana in areas in collaboration with the local MLAs and corporators, and then residents association of that area. So reader engagement is a process. And there are areas where they put, they try to do the same Janaspandana in an apartment complex, and there are people who don't even walk up from their second floor to the terrace where the event is happening. You have to literally go and tell them, that has happened, I know it. So these are all issues. But the pressures from the advertisement department and circulation department and tweaks like the advertorials, where you can't make a difference between real news and advertising. They use the same font. There are newspapers who will change the masthead for you. You know, I don't need to tell which one. So these are issues. These are all based on survival. And in the process, what is getting diluted is real journalism.
I wanted to come back to a point that you had raised earlier about how reader attention is so short, and that's a difficulty and a discouragement for a lot of journalists who are putting in a lot of work. So I wanted to, and you've moved into sort of multimedia practice as well. So I wanted to ask you what you thought about how news should be conveyed now, from being only an educational kind of medium. Should there be something? Is there something else that we, in this age of multimedia, that we need to pay attention to?
Okay, I was coming to that. So social media, what it does done is that it is like we used to talk down to the readers. You know, like we were the ultimate, and journalists had this demigod kind of status. You know, so that has come down. We come down to everybody's level. We know our limitations, thanks to electronic media, where one by two kind of thing. So what's happening is, one way out could be, now all the news is now, you have all newspapers have their online edition, right? They have their mobile apps, you know, they have multiple Facebook accounts, Instagram accounts, so news is getting morphed into different platforms. So it is getting accessible through your phones, through reels, through Twitter accounts and all that. So even on print, you need to bring in a lot of infographics. You know, when people don't have time to read your 500-word, one big chunk of gray there, you can have windows to these stories, right? Like the main points being highlighted in boxes. Or you can have an entire process being explained through comics, for instance. Suppose a crime has happened, how did the police crack the crime? You know, people read it like a graphic novel style. Or and it is amenable now with AI coming in. You can animate it. You can animate text. You can animate videos. Simple photographs can be made into video, right? So use all these tools to make it more interesting. So you can bring back journalism in multiple ways. But you have to be creative. The newsrooms have to be, they have to rethink the entire process. You know, so of course with ChatGPT coming in, I don't know how many of them will get jobs in the future, but let's see. But there are ways to approach in a different creative ways. So I still don't believe that newspapers are dead, news is dead. Media can still survive if it is smart enough to adopt and adapt to these changes.
Meera, you began as an online-only forum, actually. So, you know, so there's not been a transition to digital the way that newspapers have had to do. How is Citizen Matters responding to this time of multimedia?
So, yeah, I mean, we started online, but we also had a print edition, like a magazine form for about 3.5-4 years. So, and we published books. So we've done the, the printed word as well, and that's at least at that point 10 years ago, it was important. One, because especially if it's like longish, people still had that familiarity, sitting and reading, spending time, and also the other part is about credibility. So even now, the fact that somebody has a print edition adds huge credibility. Whether people read it or not is a different matter, but it definitely adds credibility to the to the quality or the perception of the media itself. So we did that, but obviously, because we couldn't continue, it was really the cost of printing and distribution. It's like a huge logistics exercise. We were putting so much, effort into it, and because journalism itself is like effort intensive, and then you have this other completely, intense operation as well. So it was a lot of effort, and again, covering that cost was an issue. So we stopped the print edition and continued online. So online also, I think there are challenges. For example, we still sort of more text oriented. We do videos and a lot of conversations and all that. And it's a very sort of focused audience, people who really are involved and care about the city, right? But for people for whom it's these issues are new, these topics are new, we definitely have to innovate and look at other things. Again, like kind of trade-off between budget and what there is innovation, possibilities of innovating, quite a bit is there. There are new forms of storytelling, like you said, graphic novels are there are podcasts, there is games, for example. There's something called even live magazine, where you actually sit in a group and actually learn about what's going on from the journalists. So we'll have to really explore all of this. And but at some level, I think all media is also running to stay in the same place, because it's survival is success. Those challenges are also there. But we'll have to find new ways of being relevant for sure.
Okay. I think I should be mindful of the time. I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to open it up to the audience if they have any questions. Yes, there's Mike, Arika. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Meera. So global news or news from NATO and election or sports or disaster news garners more attention, even though it may be so that it doesn't directly affect us. But local news, which affects us and people locally, is not. It doesn't garner that much attention in newspapers, even if it affects us directly. Why do you think, or what reasons do you think because this happens?
Why newsrooms prioritize big ticket events?
It's a social issue. It's not just about newsrooms. I mean, end of the day, newsrooms are composed of people from the society, right? I think historically, maybe we have this tendency to believe in a hierarchy, that the person on top is more powerful than the person. Also, even for example, in an election, right, you go, people think that the corporator or the councillor reports to the MLA who reports to the MP. They think there's a hierarchy of power structure. It's not. They're completely distinct and different, structures. But just because we think, there are like so many, MLAs to an MP, you think the MPs they're actually reporting and he's a, boss there. But so I think it's a mindset, cultural issue that we have, that people on top are like, we see it as a top rather than saying, which is why this whole debate about union government versus central government, right? But it is just that they all have different forms of, levels of government have different focus areas. So I think that is probably the reason why we pay more attention to a national story than local.
Also, there's another issue. Newspapers, like all of us, you look at Times of India or Deccan Herald as a person. Now, they are aspirational. They don't want to be seen just as a Bangalore newspaper. So they know that if they highlight the Trump controversy, they look at like they can be claimed like a global newspaper, not a Bangalore newspaper. You know, these are aspirational issues, right, of the newspaper. Now, of course, the Bangalore news will come to the front, but only when, you know, a Bellandur lake forms up. You know, it becomes global news. Right? Otherwise, news which is very local, they don't even connect it. See, if it's one street, you take 10 streets and see if there's a pattern and then highlight it with a lot of things, it can still come to front page. But they generally they don't. But there is a kind of shift from politics. You know, the pure politics, political statements, mudslinging, that has come down to an extent. Because there has been a lot of research, internal research, that what people really want. So that has been a change. But this focus, aspiration still overrules sometimes, you know. For instance, even Deccan Herald, for instance. We always say your strength is Karnataka and Bangalore. Stick to it, give it more prominence. But then when you see 5 news in the front page, Bangalore based, they feel that there is an affront to their global aspiration, or at least national aspiration.
I remember this, so Rasheed and I used to be colleagues at the Hindu, and I remember there had to be a conscious decision taken to present Bangalore news in the front page, because earlier it was just either national, international or Chennai news that used to be there, and so we had to really like struggle to say, okay, no, this is a Bangalore newspaper and you need to put Bangalore news highlighted. And I think that actually happened to some extent.
Hindu is still struggling with that Chennai newspaper image.
So, you know, this is this whole thali concept, right? A bit of everything and what you put on top, right?
Correct,
And I guess Times tried it with the Mirror to say, okay, you have the main like city news first and then the others.
Right.
But still this mindset of, you know, having the news from Delhi or national level politics on top next. You know, international is on the side, but state comes to the bottom half and then the city news inside. So I think that's mindset is still there, not completely gone.
Okay. Any other questions?
Hi, Vishwajit. So there are 2 questions. One is directed at Meera, Citizen Matters. Is Citizen Matters thinking of shifting focus to smaller cities? I know you are expanding to Chennai and increasing putting virus, but are you also looking at smaller cities? And the second question is related to this, and Taylor can answer this. When we say city, we are always thinking metropolitan. And of course, this event is around Bangalore, but if you really look at it, the urban space is always the metropolitan space. Somewhere, do you think that such kind of coverage overshadows the problems that a city like Mysore or a smaller city like Shivanand may face on the ground? I know there are very local supplements which are added. But what I've seen is, well, Bangalore has 5 pages. They are bound to cover more of the district level problems rather than focus on city level problems. That's the
So I believe every city, every district, every village deserves its own media. Okay, the way we originally started Citizen Matters as a local news media. Now we are slightly different. We're more urban, civic focused because we also evolved into a non-profit. So all of those is there. But if you really look at it in an ideal scenario, every community deserves its own media to look at issues that matter to them. So from that perspective, yes, Mysore deserves its media, Mandya deserves its own media, and so on. But the way we are now, we're sort of a little, it's not like a unilateral decision we make saying, oh, we need to expand into other cities. It is also the need and the expectation from the city. Right? We cover a little bit of other cities depending on when the stories come in or somebody pitches or so on. We don't have, for the 3 chapters that we call it chapters, Bangalore, Chennai and Mumbai, which means that we have people on the ground, we have the reporters and the editor and the local community that we work with, the citizen writers. They are based in the cities. That's what we call chapters. Other cities, we don't have our own team present. So if we have to cover, for example, there is a lot of interest from Pune and Hyderabad. Like there are people actively engaged, involved. But again, it also depends on funding. So we need to see people, from those cities to say, hey, I will make this happen. I want to see this in my city. So that way we're very impact oriented, very, this is the non-profit decentralized model. It's not like something that I want, or the city should want to see something happening like that and we make it happen. That's how we approach it.
So from a newspaper perspective, I know what you're hinting at. It's like the focus should also be on tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Like if you have a local paper, for instance, Deccan Herald, the Mysore edition will have more focus on Mysore, because the page 3 will be devoted to Mysore, and the same thing holds for Hubli Dharwad, right? So maybe they can look at linkages. When you talk about Bangalore problems, you can create these linkages. You can use infographics, for instance, how things are in those cities, and that way I think it also give a more perspective to the story itself, and also since most policy makers are located in Bangalore, Vidhan Saudha is in Bangalore, they can also look at cities in general, Karnataka cities in general, with a city urban perspective. Because what problems Bangalore is facing today, tomorrow Mysore can face 10 years later, right? When the population grows up to. So that way you can have a long-term vision. So I agree but it needs to, go into a lot of brainstorming, and a lot of research has to go in. I feel, but another thing is, there's a paucity of space. Newspapers are cutting down on the newsprint, During the COVID time, the newsprint cost, doubled, 100% it went up. And they had to cut cost everywhere, So those challenges are also there. They have to strike a balance.
Just to add to it, what is happening in cities can't exist in silos, right? Whatever is happening here affects the periphery or the larger region, and vice versa, right? What the water Bangalore consumes is coming from the region surrounding it. Or if there are livelihood issues or agricultural issues in nearby areas, then people will come to Bangalore to work. So you can't look at it in isolation, and all of these interconnections have to be understood, and definitely that should affect our coverage as well. But I don't think we're really doing a good job. I mean, has somebody asked the question, why are so many cab drivers in Bangalore from Mandya?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you both. Okay. All right. Thank you both for this very exciting conversation about cities and journalism and also democracy. And this was a very fruitful session for me, and hopefully also for the audience. Thank you again for this discussion.
I would like to express my gratitude to our esteemed panelists, Meera K. and Rasheed Kappan, and moderator Dr. Swathi Shivanand for sharing their valuable insights and experiences. Thank you for introducing us to the role of journalism in shaping our understanding of the city. The discussion definitely helped us gain a better understanding of the issues surrounding Ooru Suddi and the role of newly evolving city news in addressing them. This was such a stimulating and thought-provoking conversation on city and its journalism. And our audience, thank you for your active participation, and your questions and comments have made the discussion even more enriching. Now I request Dr. Swathi Shivanand to hand over the mementos as a token of gratitude to our panelists. And I request moderator Dr. Swathi to accept the token of gratitude from us. I'm sure today's discussion has helped shed some light on various aspects of city-based journalism and how it impacts our lives. Before we wrap up, I would like to thank the sponsors of m.i.l.a.p 2023, Manipal Universal Press, Bookchor, Gur Banji, and AdSix. Thank you all once again. Let's continue to stay informed and engaged in all the issues that affect us. Thank you.
We have a whole series of photos of images of Bangalore from across the decades put up across the campus. If you've not had a chance to look at it, please do. It comes from Professor Janki Nair's collection of images from Bangalore across the decades. So please do have a look at that.